Check out the latest highlights from the Nourishing You podcast. I just wanted to highlight something that you've alluded to a few times. So I've heard you say that there is good bacteria and not so good bacteria in the gut, or bad bacteria. And that we need both to be in harmony, so to speak, because I've heard many people say, oh, I don't want any bad bacteria. I want to get rid of all the bad bacteria. But are you saying that really we need some of both, just in the right balance?
That's largely what we know from research. Now, of course, you have to break that down into a little bit of detail, because the really bad guys are the pathogens. These are the ones that cause infections, things like food poisoning, for example. Of course, those are the ones you don't want at all. They can cause some significant issues, not only when there's an acute infection, but they can actually set the stage for downstream issues. For example, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, we know is a condition that often can result, sometimes months or years, after food poisoning. So those are the really bad guys. But there's also what are called opportunists. So these are normal residents of the gut, usually in low levels. And we know that, at least in some cases, they can perform some beneficial functions. So one of the key ones, for example, is they're kind of the less bad guys, because their presence helps protect, in part, against these pathogens. So that's an example specifically of how they can be helpful. Again, they can also just provide a certain stimulus for the immune system to kind of keep the immune system on its toes. But really, you want a predominance of those beneficial bacteria. And that's really, it's defined kind of by context. So there are some cases where we know that an organism is normally recognized as perfectly fine, beneficial, doesn't cause problems. But when it becomes out of balance, then it can be part of a pathogenic picture where it may be contributing to certain diseases and conditions. So there are some nuances there in terms of what situations they're essentially good, and then what situations where they may be not so good.
If you enjoyed this short episode, check out our full library on our NAMP YouTube channel, where you can catch up or learn more. Keep in mind that the information on the NAMP podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or legal advice. The NAMP is not liable or responsible for any harm, damage, or illness arising from the use of the information contained herein. By listening to the information on this podcast, you agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the NAMP and all agents. Copyright NAMP, all rights reserved.